I thought I would do a little bit of a 3-month wrap-up, 3-month check-in, autumn wrap-up if you want to go by seasons. I think I mentioned this in the previous wrap-up, but the reason why I'm doing it a month later than what the seasons are supposed to be is because I kind of wanted it to fit the 12-month 1-year period, and also the seasons in Australia have been a little bit delayed anyway. So within the months of April, May and June, I read 11 books. So the first book I read in April was a historical romance called Lord of Wicked Intentions by Lorraine Heath. I think this is the third book in the Lost Sons of some family name. I can't remember, but I always just assume that with historical romance you don't really need to read them in order or anything like that. So I just picked this one up. It follows, I don't remember the characters' names, but it follows this hero guy and this female character, and she sort of gets sold to this the hero of the story. What happens is her dad passes away in the beginning of the book, and her brother or stepbrother has never really liked her, so he sort of sold her off to anyone who will pay the amount of money that he thinks is suitable. So our hero takes her, and she doesn't understand what's happening, but she ends up at his place, and then obviously they have a bit of a romance. This is the first time I've read Lorraine Heath, and it's a little darker than what I'm used to. I don't really like the darker ones like this Lorraine Heath one. I didn't quite enjoy this one as much. So the next book that I read was a fantasy. It's one of the very few fantasies that I've read, and that book is An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. Yes, Margaret Rogerson. Carrie Can Read recommended this one, and I really like this one, mostly for the atmosphere. This is very atmospheric. It's set in this fantasy world where fairies sort of just exist within the human world, but they kind of don't stay around, like they don't live within the humans. They kind of live next to the humans, and they come to the humans because fairies aren't able to do things like cooking or painting or writing. Like those things are called craft in this book, and fairies can't do that. Only humans can do that. So they come into the human section, the human world, to be able to buy those things off of the humans, and in return the humans get enchantments, so they can get whatever they want. So if they want, like, I want my chickens to lay 6 eggs a day, they'll get that. But obviously they're fairies, and from folklore and things like that, you know that fairies are a little bit tricky, so you have to really watch your words. Now, our main character, her name is Isabel, and she is a painter. She's a portrait painter, so she has spent most of her life painting portraits for these fairies. And one day, one of the guys that she paints portraits for says that he recommended her to the fairy prince of the Autumn Lands. And so the next day he comes, and she tries to do his portrait for him. Obviously that takes a couple of days, and then yeah, there's a little bit of a romance, a little bit of adventure. I really liked it, although I will say that I didn't really like the last quarter of the book, just because I felt like it was a little bit too actiony for me. But like that's me. I'm not an action adventure reader. I'm a romance character driven reader, so I don't think that will like annoy a lot of people. I felt like it dragged a little bit, but I really like the romance in this. The next book I read is more of a horror, and that book is Dark Matter by Michelle Paver. I did a whole book review on this, so I will leave the link to it down below. But if you're in the mood for horror, like isolated, insular, is that what it's called, where it's like kind of just like set in one place in like in a short span of time, if you're into that kind of horror, I definitely recommend picking this up. But yeah, check out my spoiler-free book review if you want to hear more. I will do a little bit of a spiel. This book is about this guy in the 30s. He joins this expedition to go up to the North Pole, like the Arctic, and sort of do their scientific expedition or whatever up there. And creepy things start happening. That's all I'm gonna say, because I already made a whole book review on it, so go check that out. I really enjoyed this. And I also recommend it on audio if you are an audio book consumer, because it's really good on audio. It's very atmospheric. The next book I read is a book that has been hyped up so much for me, and that book is All Roads Lead Here by Mariana Zapata. Now, I went into it with very high expectations, because everyone hypes not just this book, but everyone hypes this author up a lot, especially in the romance world. So I decided to pick one of her books up, and I picked this one up because this one had the premise that intrigued me the most. It's about this girl who is like in her 30s, woman I guess, in her 30s, and she is looking to rebuild her life. That I was promised that there would be a lot of hiking and a lot of camping, because it's set in a town that is very like hiking, camping vibes. So those keywords definitely made me pick it up faster, and unfortunately I was a bit disappointed. Now, I did do a book review and it's spoiler free, so that's all I'm gonna say. Go check the book review out if you want. But yeah, I didn't gel with Mariana Zapata's writing style. I just felt like she is a bit of an overwriter in my opinion. But yeah, anyway, moving on. The next book I read is the opposite of the last book, and that is Unnecessary Drama by Nina Kenwood. This is a rom-com type book, and I guess it's adult, but it's a really young adult. It's about our main character, whose name I completely forgot. But we follow her, and she's going off to university for the first time. So she's 18 or 9, no, I think she's 18. And she meets her roommates, and there's 3 of them. I mean 2 of them, including her, there's 3. And it turns out that one of her roommates is someone that she knew from high school who wasn't very nice to her. So it's this enemies to lovers sort of romance. Enemies. I use the term enemies very loosely, because it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, I really like it. It's very cute. It's very simple. It's very just easy to read. I did do a book review on this. It's spoiler free, so go check that out. But yeah, I highly, highly recommend this one. I really liked it. I guess I haven't said the romance tropes for the other books, but All Roads Lead Here is also sort of a grumpy sunshine, enemies to lovers kind of, not enemies. Enemies is such a strong word, but that is just the trope that everyone knows. And then Enchantment of Ravens is also enemies to lovers. Can you see a theme here? I really like that trope. So moving on to something that's not romance, I read a thriller. I read In a Dark Dark Wood by Ruth Ware. Here's the thing, I have had such a hit and miss with Ruth Ware. My first book from her that I read was The Turn of the Key, and I absolutely loved that. And then I read a couple of other things by her. I think I read The Woman in Cabin 10, and I didn't like that. And then I read The Death of Mrs. Westaway, and I didn't quite like that one either. I picked this up thinking that I wouldn't really like it because it didn't get very good reviews. But I actually quite enjoyed it. This follows our main character. Her name is Leonora, and she one day just randomly out of the blue gets invited to a hens weekend from her old high school friend who she hasn't seen in like 10 years. She's a bit confused why she's invited, but she ends up going anyway just because she feels like she has a bit of history with this person. We don't know what that history is. We don't know what the story between them are, but she goes to this hens weekend and things get scary. I really like it. I think it does what it set out to do, if that makes sense. I can understand why a lot of people wouldn't really like this because the characters aren't very likable, but as someone who reads a lot of thriller as well as romance, a lot of the thrillers I read, especially like domestic thrillers like this, they're not usually following characters who are likable. Like, I didn't like anyone in this book, but I feel like the thriller aspect, the mystery and the story itself was really, really good. I did get one of my friends to read it and she found it to be really annoying and cringy, so I don't know if I'm just like used to this type of thriller, so I didn't really mind the cheesiness and the cringe, because I think the cringe factor plays a role in why these people were all invited, kind of thing. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's not like my favorite Ruth Ware or anything like that, but if you're looking for a fun thriller that's just fast-paced, highly recommend this one. I used to really like not used to really like, but I used to really want to find books that have like female friendships that were a bit toxic. Just because I find that really interesting to read about, as someone who went to an all-girls high school. So there is a bit of like a toxicity in the female friendships in this book, and I think that's why I really like it, because it portrays that sort of dynamic really well. The next book I read, I was actually gifted by my friend, and she gave it to me over Audible, and it's called Old Country by Matt Query. I know there's a second author, let me have a look. Matt Query and Harrison Query. So apparently she said that this was a popular story on Reddit or something, and then it kind of got turned into a book or something like that. But this is a horror thriller type of book. It follows this couple named Harry and Sarah, and they were living in the city, but they felt like a little bit of a change, and they bought property, a farm, out in sort of the middle of nowhere. So they get there and they're really excited about you know, living out in the middle of nowhere and having property and things like that. And they have 2 neighbors. When they hang out with these neighbors that are welcoming them, these neighbors tell them about a sort of rule book that they have to sort of follow if they want to live in this area. And at first they didn't really think too much of it. They kind of thought that they were just getting a bit hazed or whatever, like because they knew people and things like that. But soon things start to happen in their property, and yeah, it gets really crazy. I did really enjoy this one. It's very suspenseful, it's very atmospheric. The only thing I didn't quite like about it is the female main character. It's written in dual perspective, so you see the man's character's perspective, and then you'll see the Sarah's perspective. I didn't really like Sarah's perspective as much. I didn't feel like we needed her, but at the same time I understand why we needed her, because she has more feeling and she's the one that wants to know a little bit more about this mysterious thing that keeps happening on their land. So I understand why we needed her. I just didn't like her very much. The other thing that I also didn't like is how gory it is. It's a little bit more gory than what I'm used to. I've been seeing a trend with a lot of the newer horror books that are coming out. They're a little bit more gory than older horror books. So yeah, I really recommend it though. I think I really like it. There's a couple of scenes that I really enjoyed. Moving on, the next book that I read is a short story collection, which I do actually have a physical copy of. I just don't know where it is. But it's called Like a House on Fire by, who's it by? I know it's an Australian author, by Kate Kennedy. So this is a short story collection all about relationships, and like broken relationships to be more specific. I enjoyed it as much as I thought I would, but once I finished it, I think I only really liked the first story in it. And that's always the case with short story collections. Like, you don't always end up loving every single story in it, but I really like the first one. I think it's called Ashes, and it's about this son who's like a mother and son who are on their way to spread his dad's ashes in a lake, and it's sort of their complicated dynamic. And yeah, I really liked it. Okay, so the last 3 books that I have to talk about are all in the same series. I've been trying to binge read a series, and that series is, of course, the Bridgerton series by Julia Quinn. So I read, first of all, The Duke and I. I've been trying to read this series in order, just because I feel like with the mystery of the Lady Whistledown, I feel like I need to read it in order just to get the mystery and the feel running. So I read The Duke and I, and I didn't really enjoy this one as much. I like her writing style. I really like Julia Quinn's writing style. It's very light-hearted. It reminds me a lot of Tessa Dare, but just like a little bit more gritty, I guess. But I didn't like the romance between Simon and Daphne. I don't really like Daphne that much as a character. I just felt like she wasn't anything special. She was very bland, I guess, and their romance just felt very quick to me. I also don't know how I feel about the very specific scene that everyone will know what I'm talking about if you've read this book. I don't know how I feel about it. It feels a little bit weird, and I was discussing it with Andrew, and Andrew said that the way he sees it is if the roles were reversed and it was Simon doing that to Daphne, everyone would not be okay with it. But for whatever reason, Daphne gets away with it. I also didn't like that there was no conversation about it in the book between the characters either. That was really weird, because after that happened, Simon left. And then, anyway, I don't want to spoil anything if you haven't read it, but yeah, I didn't like that scene. Felt very weird, and yeah, anyway, moving on. The next book that I read in the series is, of course, The Viscount Who Loved Me by Julia Quinn, and I absolutely loved this one. I love it, love it, love it, love it so much. I love Anthony and I love Kate so much. Kate is so much more of a strong character in my opinion. Like I don't mean that in that she is a physically strong-willed character or anything like that, which she is. I mean that in the way Julia Quinn wrote her, I just felt like she had more personality and she had more nuances than Daphne did. Like, I don't remember, like, nothing about Daphne stands out to me, but everything about Kate does. Does that make sense? So yeah, I really love their romance. This is also like more of a enemies to lovers, I guess. So, you know, I'm gonna love that because it's one of my favorite tropes. But yeah, I also really like that they bonded over trauma. Does that sound weird? I just thought that that was really sweet, and I thought that that gave this book a little bit more depth, which I really like Julia Quinn for doing that, because yeah, it's just really interesting. I've never seen like a romance go into someone's deep emotional troubles or trauma in the way that she has in this book especially. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. And then I read the third book in the series called An Offer from a Gentleman, and I hated this one. I hated this one so much. I can see why they skipped this book for the third season of the Bridgerton show and then moved on to Colin and Penelope's story in the fourth book, which I'm currently reading and loving, because this one just felt really weird. It's more it follows Benedict and Sophie, but it also has this Cinderella retelling aspect of it, which I don't understand. Like, if you were going to do a retelling in each book, why didn't you do it from the very beginning? It just felt really weird that this one was the only one that was a fairy tale retelling. I didn't really like it. I didn't really like Benedict that much as a character. We don't know that much about him because he's been away. In the first book, we find out that he's been away. And then in the second book, I don't think we hear that much from him. So I knew nothing about him. Like, Anthony was built up in the first book as like this like protective older brother, which I really liked. And I think with Colin is like the fun-loving brother that we already know from the first book and the second book. So Benedict we know next to nothing about, so I didn't care that much about him. I also didn't like, Sophie wasn't a bad character, she was just, I just felt bad for her the whole time. I just felt bad for her, and yeah, there was nothing, there was nothing really to their romance. So yeah, that is everything that I read in the past 3 months. And let me know if you've read any of these books down in the comments below. And yeah, I'll see you in another video next time.